On this episode of the Catholic Gentleman Podcast, we'll be talking with an ordinary Catholic gentleman with a fascinating journey from being a soldier to a teacher to a woodworker who is about to build his own house and ultimately a convert to the Catholic faith. So stay tuned. Coming up next.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another episode of The Catholic Gentleman. We are your hosts, Sam Guzman and John Heinen. If this is your first time, please click that subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, hit that bell so you can get notified each time one of these comes out. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, you like us, we'd love it if you gave us a 4 or 5 star review. That helps get the algorithm to reach more men like you so that we can continue to help this ministry. And finally, if you are looking to discern in this new year an avenue of giving, the Catholic Gentleman would like to be considered and prayerfully discerned by you, you can head over to patreon.com/Catholic Gentleman. Sam and I have a lot of great plans for 2023, including membership programs and new content for men. So definitely head over there and check us out. Today, we are joined by Paul Hyatt. He was born and raised in small towns in Indiana. After graduating from high school, he went to the United States Marine Corps. Thank you for your service. And served in the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment as an infantry rifleman. This brought him to both Iraq and Afghanistan. And when he made it from home from Afghanistan, he got married to the love of his life. Praise God. After this, he studied the social sciences, particularly history, politics, and economics at Ball State University, where he got his degree. And upon graduating, his mentor, Paul, and say his last name again. I know you've already told me, but
Simzak, yes.
Simzak gifted him a handmade dovetail chest, which began his interest in woodworking. From there, he worked teaching social studies and history, political science at a public high school. It was through 5 years of teaching, studying, coaching, craftsmanship, and beauty that he was brought to his conversion to Catholicism in 2021. So since then, he stepped away from teaching in the public school. He's teaching online through Homeschool Connections. He works full time and he has plans of building a home from the ground up, a timber home for his family. Paul, that's just some incredible stuff. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. And it's wonderful to be here. And I'm very, very honored to be out here doing all of the things that I'm able to do and then talking about it with wonderful gentlemen like yourselves.
Oh, thank you. And for those listening on audio who can't see Paul, Paul's dressed up in this great 3-piece suit, looking very dapper.
Thank you so much.
Very gentleman. Yeah.
I do appreciate it. It was Indochino. I highly recommend getting suits from them. They're a great suit company. So good stuff.
Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. I have an Indochino myself. Too fun. Great. So actually, so you weren't born Catholic. What were you born? And I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to hear it from you. What took you from just your life in your youth in Indiana to joining the military? What was that process like?
So I was very fortunate to grow up in the faith. So I was baptized as a Nazarene, and my family was largely Nazarene Christians. And I still live in my hometown, but I moved around quite a bit as a kid, bouncing around it. We were not a rich family at all, and kind of had to move with the winds as things kind of directed us. And but I was fortunate enough to eventually wind up living next door to my grandfather, who was my hero in life, Jerry Kirkwood. And he was a man that maybe wouldn't have been able to have articulated his faith very well or anything like that, but he lived the faith. Like he went out and he did good in the world, and he was beloved by so many people, and so was my grandmother. And but he had a remarkable influence on me, and some other people like my martial arts instructors and people like that kind of had an interesting way of leading me through my life. I mean, my life has been, kind of a miracle and a blessing, but ultimately, when I graduated from high school, I decided that I wanted to go into the Marine Corps, and it was there. Like when you're going on a combat deployment, you do kind of have to reconcile those things in your life, like the fact that you might not come back from this alive. You might not make it out. So while I was there, I read my Bible a lot, and not the Catholic Bible, so not all of the books, but I read the Bible from cover to cover, and that was really kind of the first time that I was able to think about my faith in a more direct way, and to actually do that in the country in Iraq was a very, very powerful experience, and kind of changed my life forever. Where I really got interested in my faith in a much more direct way, but I still wasn't anywhere near Catholicism because it's just in my area, most people were Protestant, and the Catholic families that are around this area, God bless them. They weren't, just like going out and, trying to preach the faith to young people like me. But then I was fortunate to be able to come back home, and my wife.
Real quick, before we get there, why did you join the military? There's a lot of different reasons that men come to in joining the military, and I think it's such a noble pursuit, and such really excellent. And so I'd like you to speak just briefly on that. Like, you're in high school. Was it you didn't know what to do next? Was it you've already mentioned your grandfather? Did you have a figure? Did you kind of always know that maybe going into the military was something for you? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. We never know. We do have young men listening to this episode, but I think it's real important to kind of talk about that discernment.
Yeah. So I remember actually the first time I saw a Marine. My brother's 10 years older than I am.
Okay.
And they came to talk to my brother about joining the Marine Corps. And I remember seeing him in the uniform and everything, and just the way that people talked about Marines was always kind of in this very, reverent way, that it was like there's something about, there's like a magnetism to the Marine Corps and its values that I think I was just always kind of enamored by. But really, the real reason why I joined was because I wanted to experience a war. And I know that that's not typically the answer that you would hear. Like, most people would say that I want to serve my country, or I believed in the values. It was I wanted to graduate from high school and go on a bit of an adventure, and see if I had what it took to stare death in the eye, and see if I could come out on top of that situation. And thanks be to God that I did. But and it was a scary time. But that's really the reason. And then but then out of it, you meet these incredible men. And the analogy that I like to give to people is that, and this is what I love about the Marine Corps specifically, and why it had such a huge impact on my life, is that essentially what a Marine does, it's all about the Marine to the right and to the left of you, which is the idea of brotherly love.
Yeah.
So it's essentially this idea that you're going to go and face the worst things in the world. You're going to have people try to kill you, and that's their goal at every waking hour, and they're going to do it in some pretty despicable ways. But you're going to fight that with the best that is in humanity. So you're going to utilize that love that you have for the man to the right and to the left of you in order to be able to overcome all obstacles that are in your way.
That's amazing that you kind of chose to go down that route to, for lack of a better word, like seek initiation. Like that's something we've talked about before on different episodes, but just this idea of like we have hardly any cultural forms of initiation left where young men have to pass the test to like become mark that passage from boyhood to manhood.
Yes.
And we have no like rites of passage any longer. And it sounds like there was something in you though that was like, and a lot of these rites of passage was like, you have to face death. You have to like go through this scary, terrifying experience and come out the other side to know that you have what it takes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it sounds like there was this drive in you to test yourself. Like maybe no one else was pushing you. Maybe nobody else was like saying, well, you need to be a man now or something like that. But it was just, there was this innate desire in you to see, like, can I pass the test on my own? And obviously what you discovered was there's an element of brotherhood involved in that, where there's others rallying around you.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's really powerful. Yeah.
If I could, there are two things that you shook loose on that one. That there's a book that I think that every young man should read. It's called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. I don't know if you two have read it. It's a fantastic book. But that's actually, they cite, and I was very interested in that there are so few actual rites of passages in our very, very comfortable world that we live in today. They were like pretty much the only one is going through like Marine Corps boot camp. And I thought that was so funny that's like, oh, like that's why this book makes so much sense to me. But and then the other thing was that I don't know where that came from, but I was just incredibly grateful to my family and especially my mother that I think that there's this idea that mothers ought to do everything that they can to make sure that no harm comes to their children. So, when I decided to join the Marine Corps, my mom, she didn't get in my way at all. She was immediately just like, yeah, I think that you should do that. So I asked her later on, I was probably 25, 26 years old or something like that. And I asked her honestly, and my mom is a very honest woman. I was just like, why did you let me go? Why didn't you ever try to talk me out of this? And the answer that she gave me, it also was one of those things that kind of led me to my conversion and taking my faith remarkably more seriously. She looked at me and she said, "Oh, well, I just knew that you were stronger." She was like, "I knew that I had done everything that I could." She was like, "I had poured everything that I could into you to prepare you for any and all obstacles that might be in your way." So she was like, so I had faith in the idea that you would find a way to be able to make it back home alive. And to me, that was like this perfect analogy in my life to what happened with regard to our Blessed Mother Mary, and the idea that, it's like she has brought her only son, Christ, into existence, and then offered him up to the world to be destroyed by the rest of us, knowing that he would find a way to be able to gloriously resurrect. And that was one of those things that, and again, my mom, it's not like she knew that, she was just like, there was just something about it that didn't seem right. She's like, while I was terrified the entire time you were gone and worried about you every day, it just didn't seem right for me to get in your way. And that was a blessing.
Yeah. And if you don't mind me following up on that, like what a wonderful mom. I mean, like just to,
yeah,
to kind of encourage you to leave the nest. I mean, a lot of mothers like, have the opposite tendency. It's just something the mothers struggle with, to like, like you said, kind of to protect and nurture, and like it's a lot of times the dads that have to push them out. But
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like your mother was willing to make that sacrifice. But I want to follow up on something that you mentioned. Like you saw combat, you went through the kind of these hellish experiences with your brothers, and that's like an intense experience that I would say a large percent of the population isn't going to have. Like that's just not something that a lot of men are going to go through. And I would love to know, like, what were some of the lessons that you learned going through that experience about yourself, about maybe about humanity, maybe about those guys that were with you in that experience? Like, what were some of the like key formative lessons that you took away from that really that intense experience that you had of combat?
Yeah. Well, you're going to become keenly aware of your shortcomings. You absolutely, and we all have them. And you will admire the greatness that is in the other Marines that you serve with. It while you have a shortcoming, this other person has a strength, and that means that you have to work together as a real team. Like everyone must carry their own weight. So you kind of develop a very realistic and good mode of being that everyone has to engage in this reality to the greatest degree. Otherwise, then people will die, people will get hurt. So I mean, you definitely become keenly aware of your flaws, and you look, and there are just so many great Marines that I served with. My best friends, Ransom Martell, Aurelio Elliott, Josh Johnson, Bill Tennant, Tony Lopez, Moises Guzman. There's so many of them that when you're having a low, they will be there to be able to help you through that situation. But just because of the reality that everything out there, in a country in Afghanistan, or in a country like Afghanistan, and one is probably about a quarter of a mile stretch of land that we had to clear and defend. I think that there were over 400 IED related issues. If you don't want to, and an IED is it's an improvised explosive device, so it's over 400 bombs in or explosions going off or things like that had taken place over the course of about 2 months in a quarter of a mile. So when you have that reality that everything in this country essentially is trying to kill you, it's going to, you're going to have weak points. You're going to have those chinks in your armor and stuff like that are going to work their way in, and you're going to have weaknesses that you're going to have to rely on others to be able to make it through. But yeah, I mean, it's a harsh reality, and it makes you have to basically fully embrace the reality of life and death, and fully embrace, being a man and being courageous in the face of that, which is hard to do sometimes. I mean, when we lost our first Marine, Bob Newton, who was a great Marine, beloved by all, a good friend. Not one of my best friends. Thank God I, didn't lose any of my best friends while I was over there. But everyone knew this man, and when he passed, it was very, very hard for everyone to be able to take in India Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment. Yeah. And then it's like it all of a sudden sets in that you're not immortal, and that your days are numbered, and that it could happen at any moment, and you don't know when it's going to take place. So it definitely has a direct impact on thinking about the big questions. I would say is one of the big impacts that it had on me.
Yeah, wow, that's some deep and thought-provoking advice and experience that you just shared with us. So I appreciate that. How did you, not talking, just kind of piggybacking on what Sam was saying, how did this make you look at humanity or mankind? Because you've very astutely kind of commented on brotherhood and that unity there. But did it darken your view of mankind, or were you able to associate, differences in belief and opinion and, the sins and shortcoming of all, within war? I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, of how you got through, and, without hate and without, I think you said it in show prep, PTSD and things like that. I'd just love to hear a little bit more about your view of humanity having gone through that.
Well, I mean, it's illuminating, because I mean, it's definitely going to leave its mark on you that's going to be there for the rest of your life. And I think that kind of fully coming to terms with that, when I stumbled across the work of Jordan Peterson, like he really kind of, I think, did the best of highlighting some of the things that I was feeling and working on in my own life as an academic and based off of my life experiences. But it's that that you come to realize that these are people. Now you can't necessarily do that, I think, and much, this isn't what people necessarily want to hear, but like when you're training to be a Marine, and you could actually read a wonderful book about this. It's called On Killing. I can't remember what the name of the individual was that wrote that book, but I actually met him at a church of all places in 29 Palms, California. So I actually have a signed copy of that book. But there's a reason why when they train an individual to be ready for combat, they don't. They'll use a silhouette target because they don't want you to identify this with being a human being. And there's a reason why there is this dehumanization that takes place of your enemies. It's to be able to reconcile that you very well may have to take this person's life in order to be able to save someone else's.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the reality of war, basically, that you kind of have to come to terms with. But what you realize by seeing terrible and awful things is that there's that's in all of us. And again, that was like Jordan Peterson would talk about, which what a godsend he has been to so many people. But talking about the idea that all of us essentially have it within us to be a Nazi concentration camp guard and stuff like that. That you become aware of by seeing the capacity of evil that people have. You realize that you have that within yourself, and that makes you want to run full steam away from that darkness to the light. And that's essentially what took place in my life, is that, when I got done with the Marine Corps, I found out that it's like, I had what it took to go and do this thing and make it back and be with my family. So to answer the second question there with regard to PTSD, and Sam, I wanted to ask you this, but perhaps you can give. I have my thoughts essentially on what results in PTSD. When I got home, it was immediately coming back to a very loving family. You know, like I came home, I landed at Victory Field with my wife, my grandmother, my mother, and my grandfather. My grandfather had
Wow.
quadruple bypass surgery,
Hmm.
and he wasn't supposed to travel on a plane, and he came to see me there. It was one of the, you know, it was one of the greatest moments in my life, was to come home and, you know, see a man who had brought me so much joy in life, and that I tried to emulate, to look at me with so much joy and happiness that I had made at home. And again, he couldn't articulate it in that way. He would just hug you and cry.
Yeah.
So I came home to a loving family that wanted me to be successful, but many young Marines. So getting over the dark things that you see while you're overseas was relatively simple for me by just having loving people in my life. But if I had a guess, I would say that many of my friends were not in the same situation that I was in. Many of them came back home. They joined the Marine Corps to actually get out of a bad home life, and then they came back to still that kind of bad home life, and now they don't have that brotherhood. And in our modern world, it's not. It's unfortunately not what I would say kind of modeled after the idea of brotherly love. It's, you know, as I explained it to my wife, it's like in the Marine Corps, it's amazing because if you're having a struggle and you need to talk to somebody, you literally go one door down and you're going to have somebody that you can talk to. You have these friends that will literally give the best in themselves to keep you in the fight, in the good fight. And again, they won't be able to, you know, necessarily explain why that is, but that's what they all have. So then when they leave that to a world where it's very hard to get people to help you in a time of need, in our modern kind of crazy, chaotic world. And it's hard to find people that are just willing for the better in someone else all the time. So I wonder, Sam, if that is something that you experience quite a bit when you are counseling people confronted with PTSD.
But yeah, no, I think what you said is actually very perceptive in the sense that what PTSD comes from is essentially your resources are overwhelmed. Trauma is you have an intense experience that involves feelings of, you know, helplessness and fear and terror and things like that. And we all have like what we call a window of tolerance where you can handle certain stresses and experiences and bounce back. You can be resilient from those experiences. When those resources are overwhelmed and kind of the fear, the terror, the helplessness that you experience goes outside of that window of tolerance, that's when trauma starts to develop. Now, when looking at what you were describing through the lens of what we call attachment theory, the more connections, positive connections you have in your life, the more resilient to traumatic experiences you are. The more loving relationships you have, the faster you bounce back from those experiences, the more you have an ability to recover from stress and trauma. But like you said, almost exactly like you said, those who do not have those loving connections, those who do not have that support network, you know, they suffer. They don't, because what attachment really does is it teaches you emotional regulation. It teaches you that there are people there for you that love you and that care for you, and that teaches you that it's okay to be stressed because the world will go back to being right when it's over. But when you don't have that, then those traumas, you feel very alone and isolated in that, and they haunt you in a way that they might not if you have that loving support. So yeah, I think exactly what you said. I mean, even from a psychological perspective, is absolutely true. And one of the things, and that kind of leads to another thing that I think is worth discussing. But right before the show started, we were talking about the importance of conversations, the importance of having people in our life that we can turn to have deeper conversations. I mean, we all have people in our life that are a little more, those relationships are maybe important, but they're a little more shallow. Like, hey, how's it going? Man, I'm doing good. Good to see you. Shake hands and go on your way. And then there's other relationships where it's like you want to sit down and have a good hour, 2 hour conversation about the most important questions in life. And you were talking about, you kind of some of those relationships in your own life, and I know John and I have some of those relationships. But maybe if you could explain a little bit more too about, you have this awesome family, this loving family, but maybe some of the other relationships in your life that have really helped support you as a man, and how you cultivate those or seek those out. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So yeah, I mean, I guess it's more, I would say that's something that men really do kind of, in my experience, struggle with, is being able to just simply, sit down and want to talk about just about anything. And I've been blessed in my life to have so many great men that for whatever reason just want to sit and talk to me and tell me anything. And I always go into a conversation. I think I actually just did it with you, and I assume that I don't know anything, and that makes me kind of want to learn as much as I possibly can. But I always kind of assume that I don't really know a whole heck of a lot, and that that this person has a piece of the human experience that I probably don't, and that I should probably listen as best as I can. And I think that my students really, really picked up on that too. At least that was something that I was always praised about when I taught, was that they were like, it really seems like when we ask you a question that you actually care about answering it well, and you'll like take a second to be able to thoughtfully consider that. So I, have just been blessed with tons of people in my life. The first and foremost is probably my brother, Doug. I love him to death. I love him more than I love any other man on the face of this planet. And he's been such a wonderful influence in my life, and him being 10 years older than me is also a blessing, because I think it made me grow up quicker, because I always kind of wanted to fit in and be around my brother, even though I was the, uncool, 13-year-old and he was 23, but I always love talking to him. When I got out of the Marine Corps, my wife and I got into powerlifting and went to the gym. That's one I highly recommend to everyone. My wife is actually, was very competitive at it. I'm 5'7" and 160 pounds. So there's a lot of 5'7", 160 pound guys that are very strong out there. So I was somewhat competitive, but not the most competitive. But I remember, being in the gym working out, and I saw a young man cross the way. So Robert, if you're listening to this, you know where this story is headed. But one of my best friends, his name is Dr. Robert Lantis. He's an economics professor at Ball State University. I saw him across the way, and he was squatting with ease over 400 pounds. And I walked up to him, and I was just like, dude, you're a savage. Like, what do I have to do to be like you? So he's a lot bigger than I am, but we just started, we got to talking, and we wound up working out with one another. And I had no idea that he had a PhD in economics, and I enjoy talking about economics. And so we just kind of hit it off. But, the number of times that he's been over at my house, or we've been at the gym just talking about the deepest things about our struggles and everything. And, all of that, if you're pursuing truth, in everything. And that was what it was always about when we would be arguing. It was, essentially about the nature of truth. We would always kind of have the other's best in mind, but we didn't fear disagreeing with one another, and that brought out a lot of really, really good things that led me to my faith today. And then my martial arts instructor that I had from the time I was 9 years old until he passed away, probably about 7-8 years ago or so now. His name is Larry Bennett. Definitely took a huge hand in talking with me and forming me into a man that questions everything, but not for the sake of questioning everything. To be able to try to figure out a proper way of living and being in the world. And to all of those people, and so many other people as well. Those are just the three that I can think of off the top of my head. But it's so important for young men to develop a relationship with other men that you respect and that respect you also and want to be around you and talk with you, that aren't there to abuse you or manipulate you or anything like that. And that takes wisdom, because there are those people in the world.
Yeah, it sounds like takes wisdom and humility. Kind of you brought up a lot of great things, from brotherhood to loss and the importance of truth seeking with other men who are doing the same thing, right? That pursuit of truth is so important, without having your pride getting in the way and causing deeper division. And I know we could talk a lot about, economics and going down that path, but I want to spend some time talking about two things: your conversion to Catholicism and then your love of woodworking and beauty. And so if you could give us and start talking about the conversion. It's only been like 2 years or so that you converted to Catholicism, I think just under. And so I'd love to hear, what brought that out? You were growing in your faith. You said a Nazarene when you were born, or in childhood, and then reading scripture in the military and seeking truth, and then the arbiter and authority of truth, fullness of truth, the Catholic faith, came into your life. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about that, we'd love to chat about it.
So there's a lot there, and
it certainly is.
I could be particularly, I suppose, I found the fullness of my faith in what many would probably consider to be some of the most unlikely of places. I don't think that you necessarily live the life that I have lived. And I'm not saying that in the sense of like, oh, feel bad for me or anything like that. But I don't think you necessarily live the life that I've lived and just like, oh yeah, that guy's going to, convert to Catholicism and dedicate his life to Christ. It's not, I don't think a lot of people would look at it that way. And I don't think, and that's kind of been the consistent thing, whether it be from my approach of living my life or the way that I grew up or my academic pursuits or anything like that. So like I said, I really kind of went on a truth-seeking journey that took place when I was in the Marine Corps in Iraq, because I am not lying. I mean, I think everyone, you might not say that you are, but you're terrified. You're like even though when I went to Iraq, it wasn't a very kinetic environment. Afghanistan was, but it wasn't a highly combative environment. But it's even just the idea that that you could have something terrible take place. It makes you have to kind of reconcile those things, and I would cite that as where things really kind of began for me with that journey. Yeah, and everything kind of kept bringing its way back to that in my life. Is fundamentally, it's like what is to be my interaction with regard to my faith. So it started there, and then I got out of the Marine Corps and became, went on to school, and had to make it through all of that kind of, I mean, I think that good education is supposed to make the world less confusing, not more. And there were definitely those professors from time to time that would make things remarkably more confusing than what I perceive the world to be. And again, that kind of takes wisdom to be able to discern your way through all of that. But ultimately, it was by dedicating my life to trying to pursue the truth, and to bring that truth out to my students, and do that. It was through teaching that I think that I kind of figured out the proper mode of being with regard to that, because like if you want to be a great teacher, you have to eventually love the students, even those that many who would consider to be unlovable. And that's very, very hard to do sometimes. So you try your best to will for the better of all of these students, and that calls out the best in you. And that means that you have to constantly be seeking more and more ways to more deeply improve your role as an educator. So it was through rigorous study, and kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was I proposed a Western political philosophy course, which again, you know the truth of my Catholic faith by studying politics of all places. But that was really when I first was able to take a pretty deep dive into St. Thomas Aquinas. And I just walked away from the experience. It just changed forever. And I walked over to my good friend, Paul Simzak. I walked over to his classroom in between classes. He's another one. I can't believe I didn't mention him. He's another one of those people that I talked his leg off through the years. Such a great man that I love to death. And I walked into his classroom and I was like, Paul, I know this is going to come as a very big, shocking statement, but I think I'm becoming Catholic. He was like, what? So I explained it, to him what I was feeling, that it was like around every turn that I took, everything that I kind of admired in the world came from a Catholic lens, and that I'm a huge fan of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I'm currently reading my favorite book, The Silmarillion, I think for the fourth or fifth time now. Wow. And there are so many people in my life who are like, oh, no, Tolkien didn't write that. It's not a religious work or anything like that. And it's like, well, but he said, that it's fundamentally a religious and Catholic work. And when you kind of discover that he didn't write those things to like work around Catholicism or anything like that, but to kind of that there's a deepness to his faith that is ingrained in those stories. And I read them again and realized that it's just like, it's everywhere around me. And I felt compelled, but not in the sense that I felt coerced into becoming Catholic. No one forced me into this. I just had God very clearly work in my life and bring me to this faith, and it fundamentally changed my outlook on how I'm going to live my life, and made me realize that I needed to more clearly focus on doing those things that I think God is calling me to do, and to become a great teacher and a great craftsman, and to try to show the beauty of my faith to as many people as I can through those things in whatever capacity that I can. So, I mean, it's, a lot of people struggle in life with trying to find meaning, of like, why do you get out of bed in the morning? And that answer is pretty simple for me now. I wake up every morning, trying to do everything that I can to be the best man that I can be, because I think that's what God calls us all to do. So fundamentally, that's how I came to my faith in a greatly condensed nutshell.
Wow.
That I could go on for hours about, because any one of those I could talk about for a very, very long time with you gentlemen.
Well, thank you.
Oh yeah, I love that. I actually love the story that that you kind of found your way into the church through kind of an unexpected doorway. I heard someone say once that I think it was G.K. Chesterton, that there's like 1,000 doorways into the church. Like, why? Because truth is one, and ultimately, if you follow the threads of truth to where they lead, you're going to kind of end up at the source, which is Catholicism. And, talking about Tolkien and things like, yeah, and there's like this kind of this implicit Catholicism versus explicit Catholicism that you're talking about, like with Tolkien, where he didn't necessarily always write explicitly about his Catholic faith, and yet it was embedded in everything that he did. And I think that's perfectly okay. I think that's actually a very healthy thing, where we can approach these different fields with, informed by our Catholic faith, and bring that kind of implicit worldview to everything that we do. And people will be drawn to that because, again, it's truth. So I love that. And speaking of that, you were talking about some of the woodworking that you've been doing, and I know woodworking doesn't seem like an inherently Catholic thing, but again, it's like there's these threads of beauty and truth and goodness that are kind of embedded in everything that you're trying to do to strive to be the best man that you can. So tell us a little bit about how you got fascinated by woodworking, and just kind of how that is informed by some of the truths and the values that you've absorbed through your Catholic faith.
I again was just very, very fortunate. My mentor, his name is Paul Simzak. So I student taught for him for a semester, and just had an absolute blast, and experience that I'll never forget. And he, though I don't know if he would necessarily just admit it outright like this, but he probably he loves me to death, and I'm probably his favorite student teacher that he's ever had. Though he wouldn't necessarily just say that, but he we really, really hit it off, and he really admired what I was able to bring to the classroom from the standpoint of having been in the military. And him, and also the athletic director at the time, his name was Steve Bouger, said, like, who better to teach a history course than a former United States Marine? And I was very honored to have been there. And so all of those things kind of eke their way in, and I learned a lot from Paul. So he spent that summer after I had left building me a dovetail box made out of walnut, and then in the center of it, he had taken a piece of wood called bird's eye maple. It's an exotic species of wood that has all of these. A lot of people would consider them to be imperfections in them, but when you put a finish over it, it's like the wood just comes alive in such a way that just blows your mind. So he inlaid that. He carved out an eagle globe and anchor, which is the insignia of the United States Marine Corps, and then inlaid. And he texted me at one point. He's like, can you? He's like, what unit was it you were in? And I was like, India Company, 2nd Platoon, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment. So when you open up the chest itself, it has this eagle globe and anchor in the center of it, and then it is flanked by all of those numbers and letters. And we went out to lunch, and he's like, just want to see. He didn't tell me anything about this, and after we had eaten lunch there in Portland, Indiana, walk out to the back of his Suburban, and he opens it up, and there's this box sitting there, and I had never really experienced fine furniture like that before in my life, and I just immediately broke down. Because it's just one of those things. It's like you don't know why this thing is amazing and beautiful, but it just is. Yeah. and everyone knows it when they see it. And that's kind of like the higher truth, right? It's a truth that doesn't even have to be justified, and it takes your breath away. And when I, it's kind of like you have like an out of body experience and whatnot. I just was so incredibly thankful. And just in that moment, it's like you just have this perfect mode of being where it's just like, you have the gratitude of the person receiving it. And then you have the person who gave it for the sake of giving it. That just leaves its impact on you. And to use Paul's his nomenclature, he's like it's a sickness of the mind, woodworking, because as soon as I saw it, I was like, I have to know how this is made. So then I began looking up online. I just typed in online dovetail box, let's see what pops up. And then there's immediately some of the greatest woodworkers that the world has ever seen. Paul Sellers, Rob Cosman, Frank Strati, like all of these just men who have dedicated their entire lives to, the gentleman that I mentioned, Paul Sellers, that I bought his book and learned how to do woodworking with 10 hand tools from him. He was, I think I'm saying this right, that he was the first man in 70 years to have a piece of his furniture put in the permanent collection of the White House, which is a huge accomplishment of for a woodworker to be able to do. So I started the sickness of the mind and never left it. So and it was very hard. It's like people will ask me, why, like, I'm thinking about getting into woodworking. What's your advice? And I, tell them, we'll get used to being disappointed for about a year. You're going to not really be very good for an uncomfortably long amount of time before you finally make something that looks halfway decent, but you'll learn a lot, and you'll master your hands and you'll master your mind, and then you'll have a skill that you can take with you for the rest of your life, that is both beautiful and useful. So I can't remember, and I kind of got on a bit of a tangent there, Sam. So I don't know if I answered all of your questions, but that's it was essentially those things that as I continue to make and build furniture and give it to people, that always just kind of like seeing the joy in their face was very much like an experience of evangelium. That I, just never want something like that to end. It's one of the best feelings you ever have. That I've made boxes for people that have been given to people that served in the military or that died. They want to keep their medals in and stuff like that. So you make stuff that's incredibly important to these people, and then it's priceless to see that person just immediately adore what you have done and be so grateful for it and love it and want to show everyone, and will hopefully be around long after I've passed.
Yeah. It's the bonds of love and unity that you're able to create. And honestly, I went and quickly looked it up because what you were saying, Benedict XVI, may he rest in peace. I know that there was this quote, and I was able to find it real quick, that says, "The encounter with the beautiful can become the wound of the arrow that strikes the heart, and in this way opens our eyes." It seems like that's exactly what happened to you through that first experience. And then praise be to God, as we are created in the Imago Dei, we have the opportunity and the privilege to be co-creators or creators as God. Our Father is a creator, and I feel there's no better way than with wood, and with art. And I, as a professional musician as well, but that's actually why our Catholic Gentleman Rosary is made out of wood, right? Because it had life. It has so much, history and story behind it. And so I'm a huge fan of woodworking, and I'm really excited that opens you up. But why don't we finish today with just your brief thoughts on beauty? You kind of suggested it that that there's this higher transcendental that it points us upward. That we have the privilege of being a servant, to beauty, and to open that up. And I'd love, to finish this episode with just some of your thoughts on beauty and how you're able to, cultivate that within woodworking.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting and terribly hard question to be able to answer. But I guess I could give an analogy that I used to give to my students with regard to music. I'm a huge fan of music, which you'll probably like this, John. I actually, for my anniversary, I was able to take my wife to see Andrea Bocelli live.
Yes, wonderful.
In Indianapolis, and it was incredible.
I bet it was. Yeah.
But music it's like a human universal. Like, people really like music, and while it's we have our subjective taste with regard to music and whatnot, the fact that everyone likes it means that there's kind of like an object there that we all serve in one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
And when you are driving down the road, it's odd how this can happen, and it's probably happened to everybody at least once in their life, that a song will come on that will strike you in such a way that it will give you what you didn't know you needed precisely when you needed it the most. And that is essentially why I love the beauty of woodworking, is because it's become this lost art that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, because we live in a world of consumerism that says, like, well, knock a widget out as quickly as humanly possible and sell it for far more than it took to be able to do that. But it doesn't result in a beautiful world. And so, I mean, for me, woodworking, like a great woodworker, I think, aspires to take an ordinary thing and make it extraordinary for the sake of making it extraordinary, for the sake of making it beautiful. And what that does is it elevates the human spirit. So, I mean, when it comes to me building a timber frame house and stuff like that, and why not just do something else? It'd be far easier, like that. That's and why travel to Maine to learn how to do it? Why go through all of the hassle? And it's like, well, because I want every aspect of my life to be dripping with meaning and shine through God's beauty in everything that I do, and to bear my signature, and to know that, like, I poured the greatest of myself into this thing for the sake of doing it. And even though it might not make sense from the modern standpoint, it's what saves you and keeps you whole through dark times. And I'm very fortunate to when I was making my convert, it's kind of odd that the church that I go to, if you're ever in Indiana, you should go to Bryan, Indiana, and you'll see one of the most beautiful churches called the Holy Trinity Catholic Church, and it's where I go to mass at every Sunday unless we're traveling. And it was built in the late 1800s, I believe, and it makes no earthly sense why it's there. It's in the middle of nowhere. And I had driven by it a handful of times, and I was just like, man, why don't we make things like that anymore? Why is it that when you go to, the old world, which I have not been, but I've only been, able to go to kind of some of the more terrible aspects to see the worst place. So but I do want to make it to Italy and France and see all of these beautiful structures that have been built. But I later, now that's where I go to mass at, and the whole thing, Father Arbuckle, one of the two priests, which I'm very blessed to have great priests in my life as well, Father Logston and Father Arbuckle, and the man who ran RCIA at the time, which I think has had a name change now, but Francis Albert. All of these men were just great men, and they walk you through this church, and you can just see the adoration for the beauty that was poured into this building. So I mean, to think, and I see that from the standpoint of the woodworker, it's like a man, came in here to elevate the human spirit and unite it with something divine. And that to me is the incredible aspect of what you can find in doing really any craft, if you want to do it to its highest level. But there's a lot there that, unfortunately it's not easy to do that so much anymore. It takes a lot of time, and you have to give up a lot in order to be able to do it, but it's worth it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think your statement was dripping with meaning, to use your words. Yeah, Sam, go for it.
Yeah, no, beauty played a role in my conversion too. And I think we have such a utilitarian mindset now where it's like, we're just going to build a glass box because it shelters you from the elements or whatever. Like, if you look at all the major cities now, they all look exactly the same because it's just these glass towers, and it's like beauty is an end in itself. Like, it doesn't serve any purpose. Like, it is. And it's like, I love what you said about how it makes no earthly sense. Like, it doesn't. Like, animals do just fine without it. Like, they build their little houses, or like birds build their nests, and they're not really thinking about beautifying them or decorating them. We're like the only creatures that decorate our tools. And why? Like, just because beauty is an end in itself. So I think what you said is like just incredibly profound. And I think it's something that we should seek to cultivate as men, is a love and appreciation for beauty, as you described, where it can transform hearts. So I just want to thank you. This has been an incredibly profound discussion, and I think there's so much to reflect on here. I'm so glad we were able to meet and just learn from your wisdom and from your experience as a man. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, I second that. Thank you. It was just a blessing. We unpacked a lot, and there's a lot that could be re-listened to and, re-unpacked. So, Paul, thank you so very much. And as we like to end every episode,
be a man, be a saint.